In Isaiah chapter 1 through 35, we can find the message of the prophet Isaiah to the Israelites of his generation in the 8th century and early 7th century BC. In chapters 36 through 39, we see the historical narrative presented. One of the editors presented a historical narrative that confirms how everything that Isaiah had promised took place. And yes, it ends with this kind of notice with the Babylonian messengers and Isaiah's prophecy that one day everything that they saw would be carried away to Babylon. It's very much like in Jeremiah, where in Jeremiah chapter 52, their historical narrative is presented that confirms all of the things that the prophet had prophesied. The difference is that Jeremiah 52 is the end of the book of Jeremiah. In Isaiah 39, after the end of the historical narrative, we have Isaiah 40, in which we read, "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem and tell her that her time of warfare is over, that her punishment is completed, for Yahweh has made her pay double for all her sins." That this begins, in fact, Isaiah 40 through 66. And as we can see from the very first two verses, it is a very different message to the people of God than what the prophet Isaiah had delivered formerly. What do we make of this? In scholarship, scholars will suggest that there are a new prophet, or maybe even two new prophets, that they will name Deutero-Isaiah and or Deutero-and-Trito-Isaiah, the second Isaiah and third Isaiah. Deutero-Isaiah would be Isaiah between 40 and 55 would be what he wrote, and 56 to 66 was associated with the third Isaiah. Yet we see in the New Testament many of the passages that are quoted from this section, and the quotes from this section are among the most frequently quoted in the New Testament of all the Old Testament. They identify with Isaiah. And so we will continue to believe it is Isaiah the prophet. Perhaps Isaiah had this message sealed up. It is said that he would seal it up in Isaiah 8. Maybe it was sealed up for a later audience. But for certain, it is not written to the same Israelites to whom Isaiah had spoken in the 8th and 7th centuries. We believe instead, as we will see, that this is written to the Israelites in exile, the Jewish people now, in Babylon, perhaps around 550 BC, where it had been over 35 years of exile. They would have at least another 10 to go. And they would be living in Babylon in the midst of all the Babylonian gods, and the people celebrating those gods, and you can imagine the strong temptation to assimilate into the Babylonian population, to no longer maintain their confidence in Yahweh as their God, and to become like the nations. And so this prophetic message is given to encourage them to maintain their faith in Yahweh, to promise the great things that God would do. And we will let's look and see what's going on here and draw that great encouragement that comes from the message of Isaiah 40 through 66. As the herald begins, the comfort of the people is what is being prophesied. That Jerusalem had paid double for her sins, and there would be a time of her punishment completed. That there will be a voice crying out in the wilderness to make a clear way for Yahweh, to build a level road through the Rift Valley for our God. Of course, John the Baptist would understand himself as proclaiming that, and the gospel authors would say that as well, preparing the way of the Lord, who would be Jesus. In this context, the pathway is being made in the desert so that God and the people can return to the land and to be back into it. There is a voice that cries out in verse 6. And the voice that cries out is to say, all people are like grass, and their promises are like the flowers of the field. The grass dries up, the flowers wither, when the wind sent by Yahweh blows on them. Humanity is like grass. The grass dries up, the flowers wither, but the decree of our God is forever reliable. This will be quoted by Peter in 1 Peter. A powerful message. The grass is like people. It's also like people's empires. Babylon may seem strong now. Babylon flourishes. Babylon will burn. But the word of God will endure forever. Do not capitulate to the power of the day when it will also be rolled away as well. Throughout chapters 40 through 66, we're going to see these many prominent themes. And we're going to highlight certain passages and see how these themes are played out. So we have in chapter 4 through 66 perhaps some of the most strong affirmations of Yahweh's uniqueness, and Yahweh as not just God of Israel, but the only God and the Creator. that he is the eternal God that created the whole earth. He does not get tired or weary. There's no limit to his wisdom in verse 28 of chapter 40. And this is, of course, where we get that those who wait for Yahweh's help find renewed strength. They rise up as if they had eagle's wings. They run without growing weary. They walk without getting tired in verse 31, a very commonly quoted passage. Very often as an encouragement to people, but really it's talking about Yahweh and his steadfastness. God challenges the nations to see who really has the power, who's really there, and it is in fact he who has the power. And he gives encouragement to his people that he will be the one who will listen to them and who will restore them and will provide for them. That he asked the idols, the gods of the nations, to make their arguments, to stand before him and to make their challenge. And yet they can't because they don't know anything. They don't exist. They have nothing. And so God has sent his herald to Jerusalem to proclaim the great things that are going to be done. In chapter 42, we had the beginning of a theme that we're going to see throughout Isaiah 42. We're going to see it also in 48, 49, and 50. We're going to see it in 52 and 53. Here is my servant whom I support, my chosen one in whom I take pleasure. I have placed my spirit on him. He will make just decrees for the nations. He will not cry out or shout. He will not publicize himself in the streets. A crushed reed he will not break. A dim wick he will not extinguish. He will make faithfully just decrees. These are what we call Isaiah's servant songs, because he is prophesying and singing of the servant. And the servant at times seems to be Israel, right? That is, Israel is his servant. But as we're going to see other times where it looks like it is a representative of Israel who is acting on behalf of Israel. And we'll have reason to ask the question, who represents the servant of Yahweh? But God will continue to encourage his people. In chapter 43, he will say in verse 11, I am Yahweh, there is no deliverer besides me. No God was formed before me before, none will outlive me. I decreed and delivered and proclaimed, there was no other God among you. Again, these very powerful affirmations of Yahweh as the only God, that God would protect them and provide for them. A lament remembering that they are in the situation because the Israelites did not honor him and did not provide him the proper glory, and he judged them for it, but he will now restore them. In chapter 44, we have this very powerful parody, where Isaiah imagines all these people working together to make these various gods and idols, effort being put in to make these gods that don't move or don't do anything. And specifically, he takes a picture of a guy who takes a tree down, and he cuts it in half, and half it he uses to make warmth in the fire and to cook his food, and the other half he carves and bows down and makes into a god. And he talked about how they do not comprehend or understand. Their eyes are blind and cannot see. Their minds don't discern. They don't think to themselves or comprehend. I burn half it in the fire, yet I bake bread of the coals. With the rest of it should I make an idol. Again, these are the parody of idolatry that will become a staple of Jewish polemic between these days and all the way to the days of Paul and well beyond. The kind of the ridiculousness of what's going on with idol service. And it is all designed to encourage Israel to resist idolatry and to honor him as the one true God. Beginning in verse 24 and continuing in chapter 45, we have a very unique passage where God speaks to his chosen one, to the one he has anointed, Cyrus, the Persian, that he would be given this great kingdom and would fulfill God's purposes. And he would. In very short order, in the 540s, Cyrus will overtake the Medes. Then he will destroy the Lydian kingdom in Anatolia, and then overrun the Babylonians, and will develop the biggest empire that had then been known, and would be the one to provide the Israelites the opportunity to return to the land of Judah and to begin rebuilding their temple. And that is what is being honored there. In Isaiah chapter 46 and 47, there are condemnations and laments, very parody laments over Babylon, that there's going to be humiliation for the virgin daughter of Babylon, and she's going to be in the dirt and going to be destroyed. God had lifted her up to be his agent, and because they took the glory for themselves, God was going to overwhelm them, and they are going to suffer these things. And that's also a theme in chapter 48. Chapter 49, again another servant song, where the servant is Israel, through whom I will reveal my splendor, in verse 3. And God was going to work through that servant, and that God would provide the opportunity to pull out, to have his people come out and to restore them to their place. In chapter 49, in verse 14, Zion in Jerusalem is personified. Yahweh has abandoned me, the Lord has forgotten me. And Yahweh responds, can a woman forget her baby who nurses at her breast? Can she withhold compassion from the child she has born? Even if mothers were to forget, I could never forget you. I have inscribed your name on my palms, your walls are constantly before me. And then there's this message that your children will gather back, right? That, in fact, you are bereaved, you act like you have no children, but all of a sudden you'll have so many you won't even know what to do with them all. Such powerful images. And again, Isaiah does not feel any shame or embarrassment of using very feminine metaphors to describe God and his tender care for Zion and for his people. He asked in chapter 50 about the divorce of his mother. Yes, that in fact there had been the separation, but now God was going to restore them. The servant is again spoken in chapter 50 and is prepared. We have, again, all of these messages are encouragement of Zion, encouragement to recognize who God is and how he is sovereign and that he is the only God, and therefore you should put your trust in him. And there is this beautiful picture where Zion is to wake up and to put on their clothes because the pagans will no longer be in them, that they're going to be liberated from their captivity. You were sold for nothing, you will not be redeemed from money. That there was Egyptian sojourn and oppression of the Assyrian, and God was now going to renew them and was going to restore them. And there would be a messenger who would come and bring the good news, saying to Zion, your God reigns. The watchmen would shout. It would be a time of great celebration and joy. And yet then we have, of course, the final and powerful song of the servant. That he will be lifted up, that he was disfigured, that he had no majesty to capture attention. He was despised, rejected by people, experienced pain, was acquainted with illness. The people hid their faces from him. He was despised and considered insignificant, but he lifted up our illnesses. He carried our pain. We thought he was being punished, attacked by God, but he was wounded for our rebellious deeds, crushed for our sins. He endured punishment that made us well. He was treated harshly, afflicted, but he did not open his mouth. He experienced an unjust trial. They were going to bury him, the criminals, but he ended up in a rich man's tomb. He had done no violent deeds. He had not spoken deceitfully. He intervened on behalf of others. And so this is where the servant looks like he's going to be suffering on behalf of the people, that his suffering will provide some kind of deliverance for the people. And of course, we will see this so powerfully displayed in Jesus and explained throughout, not only the Gospels, but in the from Philip to the eunuch, by Peter and others, who will emphasize how Jesus is the servant and that he has fulfilled all these things. The celebration would then continue chapter 54 for Zion, who would have all these children again and would have all of this abundance and would be vindicated. The nations would come and would provide their wealth to him. Chapter 55, there's the invitation for those who are thirsty to come and drink. If you have no money, come buy and eat. Buy wine and milk without money, without cost. To entrust themselves to God. To seek him while he is still near, and call him while he is nearby. That the wicked need to abandon their lifestyles and return to Yahweh. He'll show mercy. That he is their God who will freely forgive. Because God's plans are not like our plans. His deeds not like our deeds. As the sky is higher than the earth, so his deeds are superior to our deeds, and his plans to our plans. In verses 7 through 9. And that God's word, when it comes out, just like the rain that waters the earth, comes back and does not come back to him empty. So that Isaiah 4:55, very powerful, encouraging passage. 56 through 66, there are massive encouragement. We have a lot more of the indictment going on, like what we are familiar with when we look at the other passages from Isaiah. We see a warning they need to do what is right and do what is just. Beginning in 56, we see that the eunuchs will have a monument who keep the Sabbath. They'll have a monument in the temple, that the foreigners will be able to come into the temple, which is, again, something that Deuteronomy is going to keep a lot of them away from. And so we see this kind of opening in the future. There's the denunciation of all the sinfulness that's going on with the people, the idolatry, the wickedness, and that God is going to provide punishment. Chapter 58, especially, the people lament that God's not noticing in their fasting. Why doesn't God pay attention when they're humbling themselves? Well, he says, well, it's only for performance. It's for show because you're arguing, you're fighting. If you really want, see, my fast is to remove sinful chains, to tear away the ropes of the burdensome yoke. Verse 6, set free the oppressed, break every burdensome yoke, to share food with the hungry, and provide shelter for the homeless oppressed people, to clothe the naked, do not turn on your own flesh and blood. And then God would shine upon them. And so we can see that not all is well, that there's still some difficulties and challenges. That the 59, the great injustices the people have done, in fact, they confess their sin in verses 9 through 15, and that God would be that advocate for them because there was no advocate to stand up for them. That there would be the splendor of God shining again on Zion in chapter 60, that the nations would again pour into him, and that they would enjoy great wealth from the nations, and they will enjoy this great prosperity. So again, this is still a very different theme than anything before and earlier in Isaiah. We're very familiar with the beginning of chapter 61. The Spirit of Sovereign Yahweh is upon me because Yahweh has chosen me. He has commissioned me to encourage the poor, help the brokenhearted, to decree the release of captives and the freeing of prisoners, to announce the year when Yahweh will show his favor. Jesus will, in Luke 4, quote this in the face of all the Nazarenes in synagogue and say, today this has been fulfilled in your hearing. And the promises of the restoration and the fact that foreigners will come in. You will enjoy the wealth of nations and boast about the riches you receive from them. That's where Adam Smith got the name and the idea for his book. That God will vindicate his people, that God will take delight in Zion, and he will not stay quiet for them, and will reestablish Jerusalem in chapter 62, so they will be prepared. Beginning in chapter 63, we got a violent image of God dressed in red from Bozrah and Edom, that he has stomped the grapes in the winepress by himself. He stomped on them in his anger. I trampled on them in his rage. And we're not talking about wine. He's talking about his vindication over Edom for all the ways Edom has caused the people of God to suffer and took advantage of them. And of course, everything of the winepress of the wrath of God in Revelation is really coming out of this kind of imagery. Then the prophet will talk about all the things that God has done faithfully for his people, how the people rebelled, but God had showed them compassion and would restore his people. And the people were handed off because of their sins, but he begs God to look upon them, wondering where he is, because they're still humiliated and still in degradation. But God made himself available in chapter 65 to those who didn't ask for him and appeared to those who didn't look for him. He spread his hands all day long to rebellious people, and that's why this happened. But God would restore them again. In verse 17, in Isaiah 65, for look, I am ready to create new heavens and a new earth. The former ones will not be remembered. No one will think about them anymore. There will be joy in Jerusalem. Everyone's going to live to at least 100. Everyone's going to have houses and live in them. No one else is going to take them from them. A wolf and lamb will graze together. A lion like an ox will eat straw. Snake's food will be dirt. They will no longer injure or destroy my entire royal mountain, says Yahweh, hearkening back to chapter 11. The new heavens and new earth that we will see in Revelation 21:22. And also what Paul's talking about, 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and 6, is all being presaged here in Isaiah. And that in Isaiah 66, there is God's validation of those who are humble and contrite, who do not commit idolatry and things. We see again Zion giving birth in a single moment, having all these children, and they should be happy for Jerusalem. And all people from the nations even will come in and live about them. And in fact, it kind of ends with this very interesting description where even some of the foreigners will be chosen as priests and Levites, and the people will remain. But the end is everyone's going to go out and observe the corpses of those who rebelled against God. The maggots that will eat them will not die, and the fire that consumes them will not die out. All people find the sight abhorrent. And that's how the book ends, with this kind of picture of all the people looking at all the corpses that are always being decomposed and always being eaten. And it's a disgusting sight to remind them, I guess, of what happens when you rebel against God. So that's in a nutshell, that's Isaiah 40-66. There's so much we did not cover, so many details that we overlooked. But hopefully we've captured the spirit of this message, where there is the indictment of sin. There's a reminder of what had happened in the past and the ways in which the people may still fall short. But overall, there's that message of hope and comfort, that God has not abandoned them, that God is the one true God, and they need to serve him, that the nations and their gods are as nothing in his hands, and that God would redeem them. God was going to restore them. Yeah, they've returned to their land in the days of Cyrus and afterward, but they wouldn't have control over it. Even when the Hasmoneans give them control over it in the end of the second and early first centuries BC, no one imagined that was the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecies. Instead, what we see in the quotations of Jesus and the apostles and his associates, and also in their messages, is how in Christ God has completed these things. How in his life, death, resurrection, ascension, lordship, and his imminent return, we see the fulfillment of this, and the ability to be new creation and the new heavens and new earth, and to see the restoration of Zion and all the people of God celebrating in the heavenly Jerusalem. To participate as a people of God in his church, the new thing that God has done, so that the former things will no longer need to be remembered. And so we can grab hold of that and find encouragement in that and take great confidence